We have Tasha here, and she's going to be talking about decoding dyslexia. Let's talk about it, an SLP-led conversation about dyslexia. And I was just talking to Tasha about how we don't get a ton of dyslexia topics. So it's always really exciting when we do, because I feel like it's one of those that SLPs want to learn more about. And it's within our scope of practice, but sometimes you just don't get enough exposure to it. So thank you so much for coming, Tasha.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
So, by the end of this pod course, we hope that you'll be able to define dyslexia and explain two ways it can impact professional practice and personal perspectives as a speech language pathologist. Identify three common characteristics of dyslexic students observed through the speech language pathology lens. Describe two EBP strategies SLPs can use to support academic and language outcomes for students with dyslexia, and define the Orton-Gillingham approach and describe the relevance of associate level certification for SLPs working with dyslexic learners. And that topic I'm actually very excited to learn more about. Here's our agenda for today. We're starting with introductions and backgrounds, and then we'll get into understanding dyslexia and what that looks like through the SLP lens, how to support dyslexic students in practice, the Orton-Gillingham approach, and then we'll wrap up with references and closing remarks. Tasha, again, thank you so much for coming on. Can you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure, definitely. So I've been working in the field of speech language pathology for over 20 years. And this is my 11th year, actually. I've been working at the Schenck School, which is a renowned remediation school in Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm a speech language pathologist there. This has been a great learning opportunity. It's been amazing. We can talk more about that. So that's been my focus and my passion. So I do have a very strong background in language development of pre-K through 5. And just also I'm a member of, because I have the Orton-Gillingham certification, I'm a member of IDA and Orton-Gillingham Associate Level Certified. So
It's amazing.
yeah.
Okay. What's the name of the school?
So it's called the Schenck School, and it's in Atlanta, and we are one of the few really remediation schools in the Southeast that what the kids come to our school for about 2 to 3 years. They come from their home schools, and they're just immersed in Orton-Gillingham, the method. They have phonics. They're doing everything about reading, and they also have math. But we're just really trying to kind of fill in the gaps of where they need support. And then they go back to either their home school that they left to come here to, or they go to another type of school where they can maybe continue getting some support. So it is a really unique place. It's almost like a lab. You're just learning and growing yourself to see these great kids and researchers that come to our school.
It's amazing. Is it a boarding school?
No, it's actually not. It's just a regular day school. So parents have to drive from a lot of different areas of Atlanta. So we're in Atlanta, but Atlanta's so massive. So we can only actually we have 250 to 265 students. So it isn't a large school either.
Got it.
Yeah.
That is really unique.
I know. It's
I wonder
really,
if we have something like that here in Florida.
I don't know. Yeah, there's not many schools. And we also have our own fellow that we can offer CEUs for Orton-Gillingham base to the community. So we're trying to kind of have that outreach. So it's not just within the four walls of the school, just trying to train local teachers, area teachers on Orton-Gillingham and how they can help their students in their schools, either public schools or their private schools. So it's kind of a nice outreach that the school does.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to have to look into it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Well, my name is Vanita Litvak. I go by she, her. I've been an SLP since 2014. I'm a host of this podcast, which is part of the Tassel Learning Network. I am the continuing education consultant for Tassel. I am also an owner of a private practice that specializes in EI, AAC, and autism. And I'm also an SLPD student currently at Northwestern, entering my second year, which is very exciting.
That's exciting. Yeah, that's great.
I do have ownership interest in Speechie Side Up LLC and Tassel Learning LLC. How about you?
So, yes, so I have the following relevant financial relationship. So I am employed at the Schenck School. We have an accreditation that I'm involved in. I'm a director of the speech language pathology program, and I receive an honorarium for this pod course, but I have no additional financial or non-financial conflicts of interest.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. So, if an SLP did not get a lot of exposure to dyslexia in
Right.
the graduate program or out in the field, let's talk about what it is and
Mhm.
how it has impacted you personally
Right.
and professionally as an SLP.
Great. Yeah, so I actually was one of those people that I came to work here at Schenck, and I really had no awareness of dyslexia. And it's interesting because I came from the public schools background, and it is called specific learning disability. And at least in the state of Georgia, they aren't
Mhm.
using the terminology because it's for the federal and state categorization. So it's specific learning disability, and I was familiar with that term. But again, I didn't know what is that? What does that mean? When you're sitting in an IEP with other folks, you're kind of thinking about your piece, right? But I wasn't thinking about language and how does it relate to dyslexia. So, of course, working here and learning about it, it is a neurobiological language-based learning disability. So if you have dyslexia, it is impacting the language learning areas of your brain. And some of the key hallmarks are the word recognition is weak. You might have spelling weaknesses. That phonological piece is just not really strong. So the phonological component of language is sort of unexpectedly maybe weak in relation to average cognitive abilities and effective classroom interventions. A lot of these kids, they come here and their parents are at a loss because they are average to above average IQ. They're not necessarily struggling with their oral expression or any of their language areas. But then this one thing of dyslexia they've been diagnosed with dyslexia. So they don't really understand why is this happening to my child? And as the students get older, especially, we can observe weaknesses in vocabulary, their depth and breadth, that word retrieval that ties along to that kind of phonological area that might be weak. And some of our students do have oral language, DLD, and written expression, of course, is going to be impacted. So, as myself, so I've actually experienced this journey. When I first started here, I actually have 3 kids. One of my kids was in kindergarten and I thought, "Oh my gosh, she could be just I don't know, is she dyslexic or not?" But I think you start thinking, "Well, maybe I'm just at Skank and I'm worrying about it." And her reading was fine, but she wasn't really spelling and just getting the sight words, spelling. So she was diagnosed with dyslexia when she was 7, and now she's 16. So I sort of have that bridge of experience of what does dyslexia look like at 7 and how is it changing at 16 years old. So I've been able to be on the front lines of it, which has been really good for me. I think therapeutic in a way, just to kind of learn about it and relate to it as a professional and personally.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think everything happens for a reason too. You
Right.
were
I
probably
know.
brought to that school for that reason.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I know.
Yeah. So what does it look like from age 7 to 16? Like how's she doing now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think at 7, you're working more on those code decoding and how can she read with the fluency, more fluent, and that piece of just really analyzing the text for her to understand, highlight the words. Or we have something called Revlock where you learn about what represents there's magic E, like the R is the vowel R controlled, and E is magic E, and V is vowel team. So she was learning the coding of language. And then you go from learning to read to reading to learn. So I think that's where needing to have that kind of higher level vocabulary and those language skills really comes into play for her. So it's one of those things. It is a lifelong condition. It's not something that goes away. It's not something that you can fix. But she's had to learn that grit and that determination of knowing my brain works differently. I need to maybe do things differently for myself than other kids need to do. So it is sort of an acceptance that they have to take on. But we celebrate dyslexia here. It's a wonderful thing for our kids. We call it a superpower. But it is something you have to, of course, learn and know this is how my brain works. So it actually gives you more insight into yourself than you typically would get as a child, thinking about your learning style.
Yeah. Well, and imagine it helps children being in a school where they can
Mhm.
identify with a lot of the other kids who are struggling with
Right.
the same thing.
Right. Totally. I think they find themselves feeling a sense of relief when they come here, and parents do, because they were at another school and the kids might have been struggling and they felt like they were the only ones. So then coming here, it's a celebration of who you are, of dyslexia. It's not something you're ashamed of, it's something you're proud of. And I think that's a gift. It is a gift that the parents are giving their children, and we're giving that to them as well. So it's
Yeah.
definitely been an incredible. My daughter actually, she didn't get in here. She was too mild to come here. So she was crying when she didn't get in because she wanted to come here
Oh,
so badly and be with me. And so I did have to find, that's sort of another thing of how do you treat the dyslexia, even though she didn't need this full intensive remediation, but she still needed tutoring and that type of thing, which is also really hard to find as tutors who aren't, a lot of times people will take classes in Orton-Gillingham, but they aren't actually certified. They don't have the certification because it is such a lengthy process. So some people will say they can do Orton-Gillingham, but they don't have the actual training. So that's another thing that can be confusing to parents.
yeah. I agree with you. So there's an SLP who has like an Orton-Gillingham type program and I took it. I have a 5-year-old. I feel like it was
Oh,
helpful enough to understand, but I personally would not feel comfortable providing therapy from that
right,
one training. So I've looked
right.
into UFly, but it's one of those I feel like you need to niche down into, like with AAC.
Yeah.
Like I know
Mhm.
that some people will say, like, I work with AAC, but it's so much more complicated than that. If you're going to do like an AAC assessment, you need to know what a
Mhm.
comprehensive dynamic assessment looks like, how to
Right,
do a funded report, not to deter anybody, but
right.
just taking the one training on that topic is not enough.
I know. So the classroom teachers, they used to be able to do a different program, but it's changed now through the Orton-Gillingham Association. But it is, for me, it was 100 hours of tutoring, extra additional training. So 100 hours, and then 10 of those are observed by a fellow who can critique it. And you have certain lessons. It's very systematic. We can talk about that coming up, but it isn't something that you just kind of wing it. There's a
Yeah.
lot to it. I mean, honestly, if it was 2 years of my life that I took, I spent, it was great. It was so rewarding, but it's very involved. So I think that's something that it's great, but it does really nicely pair with our SLP background. It really does. I think we are able to just understand it more based on our language background, and it helps. I think it just gives so much. It's a great pairing. So it's rewarding as an SLP to get this certification. We can talk about more.
Well, and I think something you hit on is important. Like you had the experience plus the mentorship. Like
Hmm.
just taking the training isn't enough, but those added
Yeah.
elements like are checks to make sure you are truly understanding what it was
Right.
teaching and are you implementing it correctly too.
Right. Right. I know. And you have, so for folks that don't get the certification, I don't know how they're doing the actual Orton-Gillingham. It's saying you have a master's degree in speech pathology, but you don't have your license, that type of thing.
Or
Yeah.
like you never had the supervision or something.
Yes, you never really graduated, but you are,
Yeah.
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 And
No,
then,
that's great points
yeah,
because, like, we can say, oh, like, diagnosing dyslexia is within your scope of practice.
yeah,
Diagnosing or doing an AAC assessment is within your scope of
yeah.
practice. But there's a big
Mhm.
but there. You really do need experience and supervision in those areas to make sure that you're doing the right therapy, doing
Right,
right by the client.
right. Doing right by the client. That's true. Definitely. I know. So, so yeah, it's definitely been a journey for me. I think it's crazy to think about that. I've worked at this school for 10 years and I've learned, I didn't even, like I said, I didn't know anything about dyslexia. So just to have so much knowledge professionally, learning from my students and also from my own, it's like we said, it's sort of meant to be, or I didn't choose this field because I had a child with dyslexia, but the fact that I do, it makes it, I can understand, but I also feel like I have to push her. I have to be more involved. So there's that fine line of being the mom and I'm not going to be your speech pathologist or I'm not going to be your teacher, but you want them to, especially I think in the older years, they have to have their self-advocacy piece. They have to take ownership and agency of what they need to do. So that's another shift for when they're younger. They rely on the teacher or the parent, but when they're older, they are the ones this is their journey with their high school career. So
Yeah, that makes a lot
yeah.
of sense.
Hmm.
And you had mentioned DLD. A speaker
Yeah.
that I had met with
Right.
yesterday talked about the prevalence of DLD and dyslexia, like around 50%, I want to
Yeah,
say.
that's what I know. So that's interesting. We at our school actually don't see that prevalence because we have everybody's psychologicals. And when we're enrolling students, the admissions team is really trying to still take students who have average receptive and expressive language. That's kind of for this
Mm.
program to be as effective as possible. It is a lot of memorization and learning these rules and the metacognition of language and morphology. And so if it can make it much more challenging, and they're not going to be as successful with this intense program if they have that DLD. But we do have students, obviously, that have DLD, a few, I would say more of a handful. And that is another layer, right? That's more challenging. Now you have trouble with receptive language and understanding the directions or understanding what you should be doing. And in Orton-Gillingham, it is pretty complex. It's not, when I first saw these little first or second graders, they had words and they call it divide, code, and label. And just looking at them thinking, what are you doing? I've never seen anything like this in my life because I don't have dyslexia and I didn't grow up learning about words that way. You just knew you spelled a word with a magic E. If you had the word, I mean, any word, oh, I just add an E. And I never even thought about why do you spell the word with a magic E? Or why do you have this? We have the CK rule, one of the short vowel rules. That is a short vowel rule, but that's something that the kids have a little song they can learn. In one syllable word with one short vowel, you add CK, and they're trying to make it cute. And so they learn a lot of things that I think if you do have DLD, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. As you know, with DLD, they're both the same in the sense that they're both lifelong. You can't outgrow DLD, and you're not going to outgrow. You can learn strategies for both, but they are something that you're going to have to always have to work on as you become an
Yeah.
adult. So, and we also see another, I didn't really address this, but a very huge comorbidity of ADHD. That's another area that they're cousins. I think dyslexia and ADHD go along together, and they're both in that brain development phase. And and we see executive functioning weaknesses as well. So they're all similar in that way.
What about stuttering?
There's not really we don't see that as much. Sometimes kids, when they're breaking the syllables of the words down, they start over emphasizing that and repeating the prefix or repeating part of it too much because they're hyper focused on now breaking it down into syllables. So I think sometimes we think, oh no, are we creating stutters? Not really, but just because it's such a huge focus for them. But we occasionally will get a stutter, and we have an Atlanta expert that we send them to just to get that piece addressed, but not necessarily. It's pretty streamlined. It's a very streamlined profile that comes here. I also work with students on articulation area. That's another piece that we address. So
Yeah, that's also a high comorbidity, right?
yeah. And then some of our younger kids have phonological disorders. That makes sense because of the dyslexia. So
Mhm. Yeah. Dr. Kelly Farquharson puts a lot of information regarding like dyslexia and the
yeah.
comorbidity with phonological disorders. So
Right, right.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So how do they present through an SLP
Mhm.
lens then?
Yeah, so the main thing is that phonological glitch is what I'm calling it. And just most of the kids, they get a C-top. If they get a psychological eval, that's one of the things they would be getting. But we as SLPs could also give the C-top. So that's an area that a lot of our kids have a lot of trouble manipulating, blending, segmenting. That it's just not as strong as you would maybe expect for their overall ability. And then you also can see that's retrieval delay with the word finding, rapid automatic naming. They're going to have it's just going to be harder for them, the slower to name colors or letters and numbers. They might not know that is either. And then difficulty using vocabulary. That's not necessarily going to be a marker for all of our students, but a lot of them, if they haven't read, if they're not reading at the same level as their peers, they're not getting exposed to the vocabulary. So they're not learning as much if they're reading on a first grade level and they're in third grade. So that's another thing that we're trying to train our teachers to really try to work on vocabulary, and they can do that through learning a lot, different type of audiobooks that they can listen to just to have the exposure of vocabulary so they're not behind their peers. And so again, weak vocabulary, reading comprehension, again, that just as the kids get older, there is the Matthew effect where their reading skills are going to go down, their comprehension is going to go down because they're not reading enough to keep up with the peers that are reading higher than them. So that's sometimes we see that with our older students, they get a psych ed done to outplace. You have to have a psychological eval to come here and to leave. And their vocabulary might go down because they haven't had that exposure that they would have had if they were not having a dyslexia. So reading is really important to keep that vocabulary note in the comprehension of text, because a lot of our students are reading just to read the words. They're working so hard for their brains to actually decode the word. They're not thinking about the text. They're not thinking about the vocabulary. So they're not really picking up on that. So that's another issue. And then really that morphology and syntax, a lot of our kids, if the morphology isn't there and they don't understand that, they're not going to do as well with the syntax themselves. Learning about syntax is so important to read because then you understand you're also working on your comprehension. So that's another area that they present in. So we really see, I guess, a typical student is going to have the retrieval while they're talking. There might be some word finding. They're going to be slower to think of words. It's just not as automatic as other students in the general population.
Okay, thank you for sharing all of those like characteristics that you might see. And that's really unfortunate about the vocabulary gap, but it makes so
Yeah,
much sense. Do
it
they ever
does.
catch up?
I think so. I mean, I think they can. It has to be very intentional. I'm going to have to read more. I'm going to have to really work at that piece because I think a lot of the kids also, if they want to read something, it might be lower than their grade level just because it's easier for them. So it's just really about encouraging, keeping up with your vocabulary, keeping up with reading, like learning out, just listening to the higher level words. But they definitely can. I think kids, it's not as prevalent. I think if our students start here when they're younger, they aren't going to have that weakness as much as some of our kids who come in maybe fourth. We actually can take kids in fourth and fifth grade, and the school only goes up to sixth grade. So those kids are already behind coming in. It's just that there is that lag of how do I keep up? I have to now increase a lot to go to where these other folks are that didn't have that weakness. So I think over time, it just takes that perseverance of the student and really that grit and determination of I'm going to work on this. I'm going to do as much as I can. I'm going to read books or listen to audiobooks to try to improve my vocabulary. Then the academic, once they get out of elementary school, the academic piece just really amps up. So learning, really being present and staying on that in middle school and high school is that academic language can be tough. So I think there's times when each kid, there's when they transition, those big transitions are going to be harder when you go from fifth to sixth, here middle school starts in sixth grade. So that's kind of interesting for our school because we have a sixth grade class. It's not typically very big. And our student side ratio, actually, we only have 10 kids per class, per 2 teachers to 10. So it's a very small ratio here. And I think in sixth grade, there could be 10, there could be 8 or 9. It just depends. So they're starting over maybe in seventh grade and they're in this new environment. They've never seen, oh my gosh, what are we doing here? But yeah, most of our kids, I think they come here and they have that determination, that grit to keep going and really challenge themselves as they become adults, because you have these incredible tools that you've learned that other kids haven't learned. And Orton-Gillingham is something that can be used by anybody in the population. It's great for any learner, anyone who's learning how to read. It's a great methodology, great program. So yeah.
From what I know.
Yeah.
It's limited. Would you say there's any like hallmark characteristics of dyslexia for SLPs to look out for and for differential diagnosis?
Yeah. I mean, I do think with younger kids, with the lack of rhyming, that phonemic awareness just is going to be weaker. Rhyming, guess it's maybe thinking of words, remembering. Sometimes students just can't remember, even though you've gone over maybe showing them not showing them if we're working on things and they're seeing letters and they can't remember the letters, or they can't remember the things that you would think, oh, we've worked on this a lot with vocabulary. If you're working with younger kids or preschool, and they just still can't remember some of the concepts we've worked on. Why aren't they remembering this? So I think some of that is just that retrieval, and it's just a slower processing speed. So, but yeah, it's so interesting. I guess, it can be very subtle as well. Again, I didn't know for my child, she was reading on grade level when she was in kindergarten and first grade. There wasn't something amazingly glaring to me, but just knowing, and then I've been working on her vocabulary as talking to her. And so I think in her case, it was interesting. She was having trouble with number recognition. She couldn't remember a 7 was a 7 in kindergarten. And I thought she was kidding. So how do you not know what this is? And so I think little things like that just, they're subtle and they might not be glaring, but I think it is very hard for parents to know, and for teachers even, to diagnose what could be going on. Are they just maybe slower than their peers a little bit? Are they just going to catch up? So I think by the time they're in third grade, that's when we have a lot of applicants for third grade here. We have, I think, 6 or 7 third grade classrooms, because maybe in kindergarten, first grade, you are learning to read still. It's not something that you should be expected to do. But then by second grade, that's really where you see the breakdown. And then, of course, they would apply here for third grade. So that's where I think the kids can people start recognizing they're struggling. Or they're avoiding, maybe another hallmark is they're just avoiding reading. They don't want to read. They don't want to look at books. They don't really want to be even in that world of reading. But again, a lot of our students are really highly verbal and they have amazing expressive language. So you wouldn't assume that they have a weakness when you talk to them, because they're very verbal. They have great background knowledge. They've been exposed to a lot. So that's where I think dyslexia is so unexpected, because why is that? Why, if they come, if they've had all this preschool and this academic rigor when they were younger, you would expect it shouldn't be so hard to learn how to read, right? That's what I think the takeaway is. Why isn't my student reading when I've done all these things that I should be, or my child, when I've done the things I'm supposed to do with them, right? So that's, I think, something people can look out for, parents.
Is there like things that school teams can do, educators can do, that kind of catch like an RTI approach, where they're like using the right approach with everybody, but then, and so some kids that may have been prone to dyslexia get the right like treatment just in a group setting, so that they wouldn't need individual like therapy eventually?
Yeah, I mean, I know in the state of Georgia, they are doing, I believe this is correct, they're doing universal screenings for that, for K through third grade. But some type of screener would be great. I'm not really familiar with that piece, but I know in different schools, they do have people who are they have reading specialists, and they have Orton-Gillingham trained providers. Because what happens in the public schools, that's where my kids go, they just do phonics very briefly, and then they don't ever go back to it. So if you're in first grade and if you're learning certain things about short vowel rules, they're not going to revisit that in second grade. You've already talked about it in first grade or second, or even in kindergarten. And so I think the pace is so quick in public schools, they can't just help out 1 or 2 students. So unfortunately, I don't know. I wish there was something in the public school setting that is geared towards all the students, but they're juggling so many different levels. It's so hard for differentiation. But I have heard of different schools that have Orton-Gillingham or different method, or they have more intentionality with their with groups, and it's not just the whole class working together. Because if for differentiation, they have higher learners, they have lower. I mean, it's tricky to just target this. And a lot of our students they can get by in the first couple of years, the first grade, second grade, because they're good listeners, and they're not really showing their weaknesses as much. They're hiding, or they're memorizing the books. And so I think really it boils down to the teacher training and awareness of the school and of the folks that are working on literacy in the schools. They have to be really aware of what are they supposed to, how are they going to help these students? Because I still think the general population, a lot of teachers don't have dyslexia training. From what I've seen, there are programs that are being developed for teachers to have a dyslexia certification through their colleges. So that's great. I know University of Georgia is doing that. But a lot of teachers, maybe they didn't have as much training either as like SLPs. Teachers have maybe a course on this, but they're not necessarily trained either. They're just, so everybody's sort of in the dark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, well, what is the prevalence of dyslexia?
So it's 20%. I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Pretty high.
That is pretty high.
I think maybe it's definitely, oh, another area is that if it's genetic, if one of your parents has dyslexia, you're highly likely to have dyslexia. I think and if both parents have it, it's probably 100. I don't know the statistic off the top of my head, but there's definitely this genetic component to it. And siblings also can get it, or some, maybe not. But we do have several siblings that come through the door, the family of 3 or 4 kids coming here, and the parents have it. They know, or they think, well, maybe I have dyslexia if they have several kids that have dyslexia. But a lot of, yeah, or the parent says, oh, I have ADHD. I think I have ADHD now that I have my kid I'm the same as my child. So that's an interesting thing as an adult, people start to recognize I could have something that I didn't even know I had. I just thought I struggled in school. I just thought things were hard for me. And then they actually have dyslexia. They learn this as an adult. So, or they figure out they have ADHD as an adult because they have a child with ADHD. So I think that's really an interesting thing.
Like phenomenon too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what are some things that SLPs can do to better support dyslexic students?
Yeah, so I mean, I've learned about the Scarborough's reading rope as I've worked here, and I put the link on the slide. But that language comprehension piece, there's the strands.
Sorry.
Oh yeah,
There we go. I was going to try to
oh
pull it
yeah,
up.
I know. I was gonna. So that has the strands. It's a rope, so it's literally a rope, and then there's the phonological side, which you have to learn about decoding. But to really understand reading, you have to have comprehension. So that's something that we're not just reading words to read words, we're reading words to understand what we're doing, and language is so embedded in reading. So I guess that's something I didn't really understand before I came to work here, that when I would work on language groups that I would pull out in the public schools, I wasn't ever thinking about, oh, this is going to support their reading. I was thinking, I mean, unless it was an intentional reading text, but really rich vocabulary is so important. Critical thinking skills, all the problem solving skills, because you will see that in reading and in different scenarios. And that's such an important part of our field that we can do, is work on language comprehension for our students. And again, just that depth of vocabulary, not necessarily really working to connect the dots with semantic mapping. I've used this program here called Ravo, and that's another program that is great for connecting language with reading and automaticity and fluency and vocabulary. So that's another great program. And then narrative structure is important. Having kids retell a story, helping them with the grammar and the syntax. That's something that I like to use, the sequencing cards for younger students. And that's even older students like to do that, 3rd grade. I mean, it sounds very basic and kind of babyish, but you can get the higher level picture card. The ones that I have are for older students with going to the vet, but it's more complex, and they have to really problem solve looking at the pictures. So I like that for them. And then syntactic awareness, understanding there's different syntax that they can learn, and it becomes more predictable if you understand what exists and how you can maintain meaning. So again, it's just helping these kids with their meaning and when they're reading. And then also another part that I like is the orthographic mapping, and that's where you use your articulation and background of how do we help our students produce the sounds in their mouth? How do they feel the sounds in their mouth? And then they can understand that's how they can spell the sound correctly or read the word correctly. So because I've had the lips training with Linda Moot Bell, and that ties in really well with if you're pretty, for instance, the example on the slide is F for TH. A lot of our little ones are going to say thumb instead of thumb or math, and then really just helping them feel the production in their mouths. And that tactile and sensory aspect is so important for students. And then they can learn how to write it correctly. So it all comes together. And yeah, and then helping them with the phonemic manipulation, that's a really hard thing for a lot of our kids. Just having them divide the sounds up and play and just really start playing with words and having fun with it, just making it something fun and kind of word play is, I think, so helpful.
Yeah, no, we play games like that at our dining table
Oh, that's
sometimes.
good. That's great.
Rhyming
And
words or just like starting a whole word with a new sound.
Mhm. And then a lot of our kids just have that retrieval where they haven't categorized the word properly. For instance, a truck is a vehicle or it's a transportation. And then it's really hard for them to think about the word. It's hard for them to recall. If they can't recall the word, they can't really they don't know how to get to that. So that mapping of, well, what category, just really focusing on that whole idea of categories and what's associated with that. If it's blueberry, it's a fruit and it's blue and just that it's round. It's just really giving them that context of words, I think is so helpful for our students to kind of, because a lot of our students will be talking and they forget what they're going to say, or they forget the word specifically, and then it can be really frustrating for them. And that's something, again, the retrieval doesn't necessarily, you can't fix it. It's just how their brain is wired, but it's empowering for them to have the skills that they need for lifelong success. So that's another area that I try to work on with our students. But we also, we're just trying to also at our school empower our teachers. I have one other colleague and we go into classrooms, we're giving kind of demo lessons, but we're just trying to help make the language rich classroom for the students as much as we possibly can. So that's another thing for teachers that they can do and then for SLPs as well. Because and I'm sure a lot of other SLPs feel this way. When you're pulling kids into your office, it's a vacuum and the teachers have no idea what you're doing and the parents have no idea. And especially with language, it's so hard you can't just come in here and work on that and then you're done. And then you're going to remember everything we did. There's not really a lot of carryover. So that's something that's important too, is for the teachers to know this is what we're doing and this is how you can also do this in the classroom so you can get the benefits for your student and not just have me do it. That's the trick, right? As an SLP in a school setting.
Totally.
Yeah.
In your school, I'm assuming all of your teachers have more advanced training in like Orton-Gillingham and
Yeah, they all have. So they start out with a lot of training of coursework, because part of Orton-Gillingham is getting the coursework and reading articles and reading books and learning about that. So they have coursework, and then on top of the coursework is the actual clinic where they are doing the tutoring or they're working with their students. They still have the same requirements of working together with another student. So, and we have reports that we write at the end that we have to use for our application to the Orton-Gillingham Association. So it's definitely also very intensive for them but I think they're more focused on the phonics and not necessarily reading the words for meaning. It's still about, oh, I just want them to be able to read this word effectively. Whereas I'm going to come in and ask the student if they read that word, what does disappoint mean if you're reading disappoint, but what does that actually mean? And can you think of another meaning? What's a synonym for disappoint? So I think the teacher lens is a lot of times we want to get this done and this is great and we're exposing them to this, but then that richer, like that Scarborough rope of the richer meaning, what are they actually getting out of, how are they learning from this as well? So it's not just about learning words, but actually understanding the meaning and the context. So yeah.
Well, it's hard. I was talking with another SLP who said that the vocabulary changes so
Oh,
much.
no.
Like
Right.
you're really having to teach the skills of how to infer what a word means,
Right,
right?
right, right. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I mean, as language is infinite, I mean, you could go on and do anything with vocabulary. So, yes, it's just really learning about the skill of context, using context clues to understand the meaning, or thinking about if I can do this in this setting with this, or with this assignment, I can do this in the next assignment, or learning, keeping a log. I try to have some of my students that are older keep a log of vocabulary. I mean, just write things down. If you can't remember it, let's just write it down. There's ways that you can kind of support yourself. But yes, definitely vocabulary. I also, with the older students, try to tie it around a unit, a book that we're reading, the book that a lot of times our classroom teachers are going to be reading a book with their students, a chapter book. So it's great to tie that in. You're working together on that unit, and what can I do with the vocabulary on my end to kind of, again, give it that SLP lens that the teacher might not have thought about. So that's a great thing. They are one of some of them that it's called the Freyer model. I don't know if you're familiar.
I feel
That's
like I've heard that, but
yeah. So you write the word, and then you think about what is an example of the word for, let's say, jealous, and then what's an example, and when were you jealous, and then, oh, what's not an example? What's a non-example of jealous? So you're kind of thinking of the antonym, the synonym, and then trying to really apply it to real life and what you think is what is salient for the student. Because we talk about that all the time with our students here. A lot, most kids, I guess, in general, will say that your emotions are mad, happy, sad, glad, but they don't really extend that out. It's just easy to say, I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm glad. But really, let's think about deeper feelings, and then using that knowledge and when you're reading stories and thinking about characters and what's their perspective and how are they feeling. I think that's really helpful for them to get more invested in what they're reading.
yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a particular Orton-Gillingham training that you recommend, or is there only
So,
one?
yeah, there is only the one through the, let me see, I have it down, and I think it's the ortonacademy.org is that's the
Okay.
one, Academy of Orton-Gillingham Practitioners and Educators. So it's AOGPE, and that is the governing body of Orton-Gillingham. And they have, and apparently, which is, so one of our the big fellow that we have, or a couple fellows, she said, and I love it's a fellow, it's fellow. She said they actually based their principles and the licensing after they based it around SLPs, like speech language pathology. So they kind of took what we have to do as SLPs and modeled that, and made it for them. So I thought that was really interesting that
That is
they
interesting.
really, I think, and that's another thing I find working at this school. Our staff and our admin really value speech language with me as an SLP. It's not something that pushed in with some schools. If you're in a public school, when I've worked there, you're kind of just a secondary person, but really being an SLP here is such great credibility. And I think they really value the input that I have. So that's been a great thing as well. But yeah, definitely, I would never have thought about getting an Orton-Gillingham certification if I hadn't been working here. And then when my own child has, just like, I haven't tutored her per se, but just to know exactly what she needed to do, it was really empowering for me to have that background knowledge, or the knowledge. And a lot of times we've had parents actually get the training themselves, the sort of, because they want to know what they're doing or what they should do with their child. So it's an interesting world that just kind of opened up to me.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So we kind of briefly talked
Yeah.
about it, but how is obtaining that associate level certification relevant for SLPs?
So I mean, I think, like I said, it's really Orton-Gillingham itself. The approach is this, it's very direct, it's explicit, multisensory. So it works. They have to, if they have a word cat, they can write it with their finger. They can write it with sand, or they can write it with shaving cream, just to kind of get that multi-sense. And then they're going to say the sounds at. So that's sort of how the basic structure is structured, and then it just builds and builds. So what really, I think it's great for SLPs because we have that phonemic background, that phonological awareness background. It really kind of ties into that part of our training with working with sounds and articulation, that whole area. It's really interesting. And what's great about Orton-Gillingham to me is that it is diagnostic, and you're not going to keep going if they're not catching, if they're not understanding what you're doing. You're going to stay on that space for a while, for as long as it takes. And you see the gains and the progress very quickly. And I think that can be, for me as an SLP, is a little bit challenging, because I'm thinking, wow, I've been working with a student for so long and I haven't seen that progress I want to see maybe with their acquisition of the R sound, right? But when you're working with this with Orton-Gillingham, you have that data and you see the progress a little on paper. You can kind of see it a little bit easier. So that was kind of an unexpected sort of reward for me. And yeah, it's definitely, it's not as maybe creative in certain ways, but then you can get more in depth with, like we said, reading and talking about syntax and learning about vocabulary. So it does have, really, it's a foundation to build on what we know as SLPs, and it gives it's just a good foundational learning for an SLP. Because again, I've been told as an SLP with this certification, I'm a unicorn. It's really hard to find an SLP with this training. So I think if for folks that are trying to do tutoring or to have their own practice or anything, it's definitely something that parents are really wanting for their student. They would love to have an SLP who's also Orton-Gillingham certified. And
How do you feel like it is working with this population? I know that you said sometimes they'll avoid reading. Do you feel like they're very cooperative? Like once they know that you're on their side?
Yeah, I mean, our students really, I think, are it's a joy. My school is so joyful, and we have such a great staff, and everybody's really cares. I think it's like a family community. It's a small, close-knit school, and they really feel, I think, that people understand them, and just by being together and saying, we understand you. And the younger kids have no idea, honestly. I think they think this is just the regular school that they would go to. Or some of them, they don't recognize that. But the older students, that's where they do maybe occasionally will be frustrated or give you some pushback, not necessarily with writing. So certain kids, if I'm working with them and I'm saying, write these things down about this topic, and they don't want to write because it's hard. And then it's just, well, let's just work together. I know where you're coming from. I know this can be challenging. You're just kind of giving them that reassurance, because I think it's really hard. I mean, dyslexia, it takes a lot of brain power as a child with dyslexia, they're working a lot harder than students that are neurotypical. So I think for me to have that awareness that these kids are working harder than their peers, and it's hard, and they're working all day on this skill. And it's a lot for a lot of these kids. It's hard. I mean, that's why they're here. So just really having that awareness. We actually at our school have a house system, and I was the director of that for 3 years, where they're put into houses, sort of like Harry Potter. There's 4 different houses. We have a mascot that's where the phoenix is, and the mascot, I've worn that costume. So it is like this really fun kind of place. Our founder, David Schenck, he was the one that said it should be a joyful place for learning. And I think it's really important to remember that, because they are young kids, but this is love. I try to encourage a love of learning for them, because I always loved school when I was a kid. And that's something that I'm hoping that they can understand too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. That's such a fun way to go about it.
I know. So yeah, so definitely I would have people check. I know it looks daunting, I think, to have the 100 hours, and it is hard, under a fellow. So the fellows are people, you have to kind of explore, how will I do this? Because I think through the certification, I was able to have a fellow at my school. Person was helping me. So I think for somebody not working in a school like this, they would have to go on the website and seek out, how would I obtain this but I think it's a great add-on for sure if people are considering it.
Yeah, that's great. Are there any other competitive certifications?
I mean, not that I'm aware. This is definitely for Orton-Gillingham. I mean, I know I think you can have Wilson certified.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can. Wilson certified. I'm not as familiar with Wilson, but that would be the competitor. So some people, and I'm not even familiar with how long that takes or what that approach, how it's different. I think Wilson is more, maybe there's more lessons that are ready to go, that type of thing from what I've heard, but I'm not sure. So some people are OG certified and Wilson. Those are the two, I think, that are the big ones. But there are different programs as well. I think there's certain places. It's just, do they have, so for our school, we really want to get into Orton-Gillingham, but other schools maybe have a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So it just depends on what they think is working for their population. But
Mhm. Do
yeah,
you remember the cost of the certification or like
um,
around that?
I believe it's around and possibly. So I had to enroll in a course with. So I believe it was about $500 per. It was probably $1,000 maybe
Okay.
total. So nothing something, but it's a great investment. It was a great investment. Again, tutor. I'm always being because I'm a member of the Orton-Gillingham. I'm on their website, and I'm always getting people asking me if I can tutor their kids. So it is sort of, you feel bad because you can't possibly keep up with the demand. So the demand is definitely out there. And again, to be an SLP, it's a dual certification really to have this as well. So,
Mhm. Not to do this like for the income, but if there's
yeah,
an SLP listening to this that has a private practice that maybe wants to take on like this type of like population, what is the average reading tutor rate versus SLP rate, or do you charge the same?
I definitely think it's a little bit more, it's definitely more rate wise than, I'm not exactly sure what the going rate is for in the community, but I know it's more than if you don't have your master's degree in speech pathology. So it's definitely a higher rate. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure of the figure.
It's probably
Yeah.
similar, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I think so.
yeah, I think that parents, and it's not like, it's not something that, they will have dyslexia forever, but it's hopefully
Right.
something that they'll have to be in therapy or tutoring for a long time. Do you still call it tutoring if you take on a private client, or what do you call it?
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I know it's speech therapy if I have a private speech therapy client, but then I think for the reading, the parents are thinking of it as tutoring.
Right.
So I think I will say it's tutoring.
Yeah.
It's
It's like
tutoring therapy.
intervention, right? Too, like interventionist. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that's weird. You're right. It isn't necessarily because it is tutoring, but you're not really, and that word tutoring is misleading because you're not only helping them catch up with a subject matter that you would think of as a tutor. So, yeah, it
Right.
is. I'll have to think of a term that's more comprehensive.
Yeah,
And
because you're also working on the language piece too,
yes, you
right?
are. Yeah. Well, I mean, so technically, Orton-Gillingham doesn't, that's not what that's about. But I
Okay.
think as an SL, yeah. So Orton-Gillingham is that more structure, reading, literacy, how am I going to learning, and really explicit teaching of the phonics rules and all of that. But then as an SLP, that's where would embed the language myself because I'm trying to add to that. I'm going to layer on the language as much as I possibly can. So
Mhm.
yeah. And it's really interesting how they tie together. I mean, I felt like, again, when I was working in the public schools, everything was so really segmented and siloed. And I had no idea. If I had a student that had a specific learning disability, I didn't really understand what was I supposed to do. I just knew I had these language goals to work on, but I didn't know why did I have these language goals? How is this really going to help this student? And to know now that it's going to help with their reading or they're going to have, or I understand what their profile means so much more now. It's night and day, I think, for me. Just, yeah, having that integration of what we're doing to help the child has been great. So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. So thanks for sharing these resources. Did you want to highlight each one or talk
Yeah.
about them a little bit?
Well, so the IDA just came out, which is really exciting, with a new definition of dyslexia, and they had not had that definition. It was retooled, and that's been I think that's really interesting for me, just as a practitioner in my child, because what it's saying is that it's a journey, that dyslexia isn't going to, it's not, it doesn't explicitly say it's not you can't remediate it, but it does talk about the fact that it's a journey, that it might impact them with their job perspectives. And it really, so it sort of validates me as a parent with a 16-year-old, because I've seen it as a journey myself, and to see that's the definition now is inclusive of that thinking. And it really, there can be within the IDA definition, that feeling of, there is a lot also with our students, there can be some anxiety because they know, oh, I have this difference. And so it's a nice, I think the IDA did a great job with the definition. And that's what people in the IDA world have been talking about, is the new definition, the revised definition. So I would definitely check that out. And so Hugh Katz, he's a great researcher, and he did this textbook about connecting, or he and then they have this great looking at how does dyslexia and reading disorders and connecting speech language pathology, which I haven't really seen that before. So I think that could be a cool thing to look at. Literacy How is another wonderful resource about there. It's talking about evidence-based methods to teach reading, but there's also that language component that they touch on as well. And that's been really helpful for me. And Reading Rockets, that's a fun title. I love that. That's another structured literacy link and it's not just reading. They talk about different comprehension strategies. So that's been useful. And of course, the Florida Center for Reading Research is amazing. That is another way to come up with phonological awareness games, that different activities, different things you can do with students, and it's no cost, and that's great. And then that's the link for the Orton-Gillingham Academy at the end, if you want to check that out and see what that's about. So yeah, those are all really helpful links that I've used and can recommend.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Is there a go-to resource that you share with parents to just like work on things at home?
There a lot of times again, one of the tools that's not really listed here is this thing, the EET, the expressive expansion tool. And that's something that is a little fun manual or multisensory little doodad. It's but it has these little balls that represent green group, blue do, pink parts, and it's just a nice little fun thing. So that's, I'm not taking credit for it. I didn't develop it, but the EET tool has been really a great tool for, especially for the younger students. I think that's a go-to. We like to have our kids work on that naming, retrieval, playing headbands. That's another fun thing that they do. And you can kind of really structure it for them. So tell the student the group it's in. If you're playing with two kids, you have the one student tell the other student, you're in the furniture group, and you lay on you. Oh, you're a bed. I mean, it's pretty basic, but just getting used to that, really thinking, putting things in categories, and not just saying whatever top of mind, just having them work on piecing everything down and parsing it down. So I think that's another one. I like Guess Who. Those are fun those are all little things parents can do, because we really try to encourage gameplay at home and making it fun. So they have that. We also have a family game night that we try to, where the SLP program is encouraging family game night. They can submit a picture and play games, because we as a society, we're not really sitting around with our families playing board games anymore, and having those moments with your family and just kind of learning about turn taking and not in friendly competition, I guess, but critical thinking. Those are things I think we're all kind of missing in our playing games in person and not on an app, right?
Right.
So those are all, yeah.
I like those suggestions. It wasn't what I was expecting, but I like them. So here's some articles that you've shared.
Good.
I love that they're all open access and they are more like informational. So they're
Right.
not like explicit studies that have been done. They're not
Right.
quantitative data. So that's why they're in this red level, but they're still very informative and just shows that we need more research like in this
Right.
area for SLPs
Yes.
in that the yellow and green. But the fact that they're open access, they're free, definitely check them out.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. They're good.
Tasha, this has been amazing. Where can everybody find and connect with you?
So, yeah, so I'm currently at the Schenck School, and that is the Schenck website. You can look at Schenck School on Instagram, and then my personal email is tashawisehart@gmail.com.
Great. Thank you again. And I am definitely going to be looking into all of those resources that you shared.
Great. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, Anita.